Hebrews chapter 12. Hopefully it's going to be a passage that you're familiar with. Maybe not the passage itself, but the context that it's in and the verse that we're going to look at. This was a verse that when we first started coming up here and I started doing devotions, that Mom mentioned to me that it would be neat to do something on this, and I kind of struggled with it because as I read through this verse, I had one interpretation that as I read it, I interpreted it through, and for me that made me a personal problem for me, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. But as I studied it, I found out that my interpretation wasn't correct, which happened. And now it makes a lot of sense. And I think in the context of what we do here this weekend on Nana and Pop-Up Memorial Weekend, as we talk about family, I think it's pretty important. So, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1, and it's probably a verse that we've all heard before and we've gone through. The verse says, "Wherefore, seeing we are encompassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." I want to break this up into three parts. I want to go through the verse and just talk about certain key words and phrases that are in it. Then I want to talk about it in its context of how it falls into the rest of it here, and then some personal application about it. When we see the word wherefore, or therefore, we ask what's it there for? And it means, it's linking back to the previous text. We got to remember, when the Bible was written, the person that was writing it, ordained by God, did not write chapter 1, verse 1, and then wrote out a sentence, and then wrote chapter 2. They wrote it in a letter form, or they wrote it in a paragraph form. But as it was translated and as it was moved around, people broke it down so that we would be able to find passages and be able to locate them, and the chapter and verse segments we have are like that. So even though we're starting a new chapter here, the thought is being continued from chapter 11 through. And we're going to go back and look at chapter 11, which I'm sure a lot of people realize is the heroes of faith, going through that. So, wherefore, we know that he's making a summation here. Seeing that we were encompassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, it's interesting that he uses the word cloud of witnesses. Who's this book being written to? Hebrews. And Hebrews are? Jewish people. Okay? And it's being written in the context of, you've learned all this before, but now I want to make sure that you understand, or I want to point out clearly what all of these things were that were shown in the Old Testament, and how they pointed to something so much better. Okay? And as he's writing it and putting it through there, he's saying this is important to you. And in order to do that, in the Jewish mindset, as you read the Old Testament, and as you read how Jewish people are taught and how they understand things and how they remember things, they're brought back with a lot of images. So for him to use the word cloud is a very precise word that he put here, and it just wasn't off the top of my head, this is what I'm coming up with. The word cloud is very specific here. Can anybody take a shot at why they think the word cloud would be important to a person of Hebrew descent, Jewish heritage?
Well, you had the cloud that they followed through the wilderness.
Okay, as they left Egypt, and this is one of the biggest, keyest points in Israel's history as they're prisoners within Egypt. Remember that whole story. They moved there because there was a famine in the land. They started to take over the land. They got to be so big in number. They started to be oppressed. God raised up Moses. Moses went in there. They had the plagues. They led them out, and the key thing that led them out was the Passover. And that becomes one of the defining points, is the Passover. And then they're moved out through, and what leads them out of the captivity in Egypt to the promised land that they're given is the cloud. As that translates into the Christian life, we realize that Egypt represents us in our sinful nature, in our old nature. And the Passover, when the Passover happens, it's Christ's crucifixion, leads us into new life, and we're being moved into the promised land. Right? And what is guiding us, moving us through? It's the cloud. And the cloud not only leads them, what also did the cloud do for them?
Provided water and shade.
Okay. It provided shade and it provided water, and that's part of what comes into this, is there's a feeding that goes on with it. That's good.
It provided protection when they were at the Red Sea.
We're at the Red Sea, and it's interesting because if you read that in the context, and boy, I heard somebody talk about this the other day, and I just about got sick. Well, I think it was on that Nature, that History Channel thing that was on. When they got there, the cloud was leading them, and they were following them. And remember, they got to the point where they were at the Red Sea, nowhere to go. And the Egyptian army is pursuing them hot in chariots, bent on either returning them or killing them. right? And there's nothing they can do, and the people start to murmur, I wish we would have died in the land of Egypt. And what happens with the cloud? It moves from the front of leading them to a rear position, and actually if you read it in the Hebrew text, it takes up a rear guard. And it blocks the way. And it's in between them and actually stops them. And as the Red Sea opens and they cross, the cloud blocks the view from the Egyptians until the Israelites are safe. And then the cloud begins to move again to lead them on and allows the Egyptians to go in and be destroyed. And it's very important how this cloud operated. For the writer of Hebrews to put that word cloud in there, all these things come to mind in the Jewish mindset of these stories that they have been told over and over and over again. And every time they observe the Passover, this is brought up again and again. So it's a very important word, cloud, that's been put in there, not just a random word. The next word that gave me trouble, and this is where I stumbled at this verse a lot, was the word witnesses. Now, as I read this verse, so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and run the race. I'm thinking, and one commentary I read this week also talked about it in the sense, was this cloud is like the big arena, and all these people are around us cheering us on, pressing us on to victory. And I'm thinking, you know what, sometimes even on my best day, I screw up. And I don't want to think about all these people that have made it. They've achieved, they've persevered through their life, even though they might have had problems, and now they're watching me stumble along the way, even when I'm doing the best I can. And for me, that's a hard thing. That, okay, I don't have a lot of good days, but the days that I do have good, I still screw up, and how embarrassing is that out in front of everybody? The word witness in the Bible is a translation of a Greek word that is martyr. So everywhere you see in the New Testament the word witness, it's really the word martyr. And I don't know why they changed it that to be witness, but when it says you will be witness for me in, you will be martyrs for me in. Be ye a witness of, be ye a martyr of. And the martyr of, pretty much, the witness martyr termination is you've experienced something and now you're proclaiming it or you're living it out. So in the case of a martyr, someone that is tortured and murdered for their faith, they believe something. And what they've believed and what they've seen and what they've experienced is being carried out in the fact of, no matter what it costs me, I will give up my own life for it. And the martyrdom and the witness thing, if you start to intertwine the two, are hooked in together. So the witnesses that are around us are not necessarily just people witnessing us. They're people that have witnessed other things, experienced other things. And therefore, they are a witness to us, not a witness of us. And that changes the whole context of how we view this verse, and we'll see that as we go on. So, after we get through the word witness, we're talking about laying aside every weight. Okay? We know clearly that the culture we're talking in, there's a lot of athletic games, there's a lot of running races, and we know that Paul, in his writings, whether or not he wrote Hebrews, we're not sure, likes to talk about running in a marathon and doing those kind of things and finishing a race. We talk about laying aside every weight. A weight would be anything that we would carry along with us that would either weigh us down and slow us down, or that would take our attention away from what we're doing. Okay? If we're going to run through a marathon, we don't really want to carry a 50-pound pack of video games or snack bars or whatever. If we were going to carry anything, we would only want to carry the essentials of what we had to carry in order to complete the task that we were set for. We also don't want to take things that would divert our attention away from the race. Okay? Let's say we had an infant baby and we were going to strap him on the back, and all of a sudden we have to stop and we have to feed him, or we have to stop and we have to change him. Not that it's a bad thing, but in the sense of running a race, we have to be careful of what we are being weighed down with if it's diverting us away from the race. Now, the example that I gave might not be the best, but in running this race that we're going to be talking about, taking care of those infants would be part of the race, and that would be something that we would do. But laying aside these weights are anything that takes our attention away or anything that slows us down from completing the task we have at hand. The next phrase is kind of interesting, and the translation in the King James probably isn't the best. The translation in the King James is the sin that doth so easily beset us. A better translation is it's an adjective of the word sin, and it's an easily entangling sin, is really the whole idea of it. The word sin here, we know there's different words for sins, there's trespass, there's other ones. This is the one for missing the mark, which is key here, because we're talking about completing a race, completing an endurance, finishing at the goal line. And part of finishing at the goal line is taking the shortest route to get there. Okay? We don't want to be running a 100-yard dash and start off on this direction and come around it from the side, because we have no chance of winning the race. We don't want to start a marathon, 26-mile marathon, and start running in that direction. We're missing the mark. The mark is here in front of us, and we want to take the shortest path in order to get there. The interesting thing about this phrase, and I haven't been able to actually pinpoint it down, so it might be something you might want to think about or keep in the back of your mind, it's a definite article. The easily entangling sin. So, is he talking about a specific sin that's easily entangling? It comes on us and it diverts our attention, it takes us away? Or is it just any sin that comes along and entangles us and prevents us from trying to complete the task at hand? I don't know. In my thought, I think it's one sin, and I can't really tell you what that sin is. But we know we're set on a path, and we know we're set on a goal, and we're trying to get there, but there's always something that's stopping us, whether it's self, whether it's pride. There always seems to be something that keeps us, our eyes off of the target. And we always have to be resetting ourselves to get back on. So it's the easy entangling sin that always encompasses us, slows us down, prevents us from doing what we're supposed to be doing. And for the word missing the mark, you can always think of the rifle or the bow shot. You know, you're shooting at the bullseye, you should be aiming at the bullseye. You can't hit it if you're off to the side or anything. And that's exactly the term for missing the mark. And the last part of the verse is run the race with patience that is set before us. This tells us that it is not a 100-yard dash. It is not something that's completed like this. There needs to be endurance and there needs to be patience in order to complete it. And that also means, since you need patience and endurance, it's not only long, but it's going to be hard. There's going to be trials along the way. Like in a marathon, you hear people that hit the wall, and it's easy to just give up and quit. But we press on, like Paul said, for the prize. That's set. 1 Corinthians, he talks about a prize that is set before us. And it's worth running the race for the prize. And that's one thing that each one of us have to determine it for ourselves. Is the path that we're set on worth the prize that we're to obtain? And that, to me, comes down to the whole thing of salvation. Is that prize worth obtaining? And if it's not worth obtaining, what's the sense of salvation? If we're not going to do what God wants us to do, how could it even work in a person? Because God is going to set you on the path and tell you what the prize is. And hopefully, if I remember, we're going to talk a little bit about what the prize should be, and not always what it is. Okay? So, running the race with patience. And patience means it's going to take a long time to see the fruit of it. And as we'll see, some may not even see the prize in this lifetime. So that's the thing. Contextual. We talked about the cloud of witnesses. These witnesses, we know, because of the wherefore, goes back into the previous chapter, chapter 11, and we know that's the heroes of faith. One thing that happens in today's society, because of the way we've watered down church and because of the way we've watered down how we teach things, we have the Sunday school mentality of all these people in the Old Testament, and it's easy to look at them and go, these were superhuman people, and I can't ever be like them. David and Goliath, here was this little boy, and I'll never be like that little boy who went out and challenged this giant Goliath. And I don't know how he did it, and I don't know. And here's Noah, and for whatever reason, he was super spiritual and supernatural, that he could build this ark of mammoth proportions, and he could do these things that are... But if we actually look at these stories, we find out that these were real, average, ordinary people who served a supernatural God and allowed themselves to be controlled by the supernatural God. And because of that, they were allowed to do great things. In fact, if you start to go through this heroes of faith, you start to look at them and go, why is he in there? Why is he in there? Couldn't you put somebody better in there? Let's talk about just a few of them.
Lot.
Lot.
David.
Lot, yeah. Well, let's start with Lot is one of the hardest ones to understand. Righteous Lot. And how many times do you go in the New Testament and it says righteous Lot, and you're looking in the Old Testament, where is this righteous Lot? Okay? There's one. David. We know the shortcomings that David had. We just went through a study at home on 1 and 2 Samuel, the life of David. And we all know about Bathsheba's sin. But we go all through this and we find out that David, old in his age, decided he was going to number the people. And he did it. And because of that, God said, I'm giving you choices of three plagues that are going to come upon you. You choose which one you want. And of course, God used that. But there was another one. David and all the wives that he had, and all the problems that that caused with all of his children. Absalom trying to take over the kingdom. And David, not being the God-fearing king, saying, this is my throne that God has given me, said, oh, I'm running, let's go. And off he goes, and waits until it's time to come back. And David is a person that failed all along, and yet we see that David is one of the greatest heroes in the Bible. Rahab the harlot, and what she did with her life. And we only know of one instance in the Bible where she showed any kind of faith, and because of that, she's included in the genealogy, and she's also included in the family of Israel because of that. Okay? One for me is Gideon. In Sunday school, we know all about Gideon picking his 300 mighty men and going out there and fighting the Philistines. But if we don't know the rest of the story, we don't know that when the Philistines came for him, he went and hid in the threshing bin that was up high. And his dad actually changed his name to him, that he was going to be the one that would defeat Baal. But no, Gideon is off hiding. Why are you hiding, Gideon? Well, they're coming to kill me. Okay, where's your faith there? And then after Gideon becomes a great champion, what does he do? He goes and makes himself this priestly robe and sets him up as this great priest. And I'm reading it going, how can he be included in here? Another one is Samson. Samson fails and fails and fails and fails and fails and fails and fails. And yet, when there's nothing else left, what does he say? Avenge me because of my 2 eyes. Not for your great name's sake, or because you're a holy God, or for my 2 eyes' sake. And he pulls the thing down. But yet, he's included. And so many of these are included.
Daniel.
Well, see, now Daniel's one that, can you find a fault with Daniel? So I would write a chapter about Daniel's faith. And when I'm talking about Joseph, I would write chapters and chapters about Joseph and how great he was. And look at all the times he overcame sin and showed himself to be faithful. And yet, what's the commendation given to Joseph? Verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. That's hard to understand, right? But you know what? When we look about this cloud of witnesses, the people that have gone on before us and have persevered, and they are the examples that are set for us, letting us know that we can do it, guess what? We find out that these are people just like me and you. They're people that know right and wrong, that are trying to do what's right, but fail. And we fail over and over and over again, but they persevered in the end. And that's what's important, is that they ran the race with patience, and they got all the way through it. So, these people were testifiers. They were both in deed and in word. They were all forward-looking, not just in the immediate. And that's one of the keys when you start to look through this. Joseph gave commandment concerning his bones. It was a looking forward thing. It wasn't something he was going to attain here in this life. It wasn't something for him. But he understood the significance of, my bones cannot remain in Egypt. They have to be moved. Okay? And we see that all the way through. We can go back and we can even talk about some of these other things, like with Abraham offering Isaac. Okay? This wasn't good for Abraham, and he knew it wasn't good for him. But he said, and we're told in Hebrews, that he offered Isaac because he believed that God would raise him back up from the dead. And that tells us that Abraham actually believed he had to go through with the actual sacrifice of his son. It wasn't going to be, okay, God, I'll go through with it, and I know that you're going to deliver me from this. It was a matter of, I have to do this. But I trust God that he will raise up my son because of the promise that was given. Noah, getting on the ark. He had to actually physically go through with it, trusting in God that he would be delivered, not knowing what the outcome was going to be. And yet, he chose to go through with it. Moses, talking about Pharaoh's wrath that he had to endure. Knowing that he would go in there was almost certain death because of the history that he had. And yet, by faith he went, trusting that God would do what was right in the end. And actually, because of the trials that he went through and saw the hand of God, Moses goes from this guy who was this timid, meek, rash, not very nice guy, up through a guy that doesn't want to do what God wants him to do, does it anyway, and then becomes one of the greatest leaders as far as teaching prophecy, teaching law, leading people, and becomes one of the greatest examples and one of the greatest authors in the book that's for us. Okay? One of the key things here in Hebrews chapter 11, it tells us that these did not receive the prize. Hebrews 11:13, these all died in faith, having not received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on this earth. They came to an understanding of what running the race was. And it's not, I'm going to have my best life now. It's not that if I obey God and what He tells me to do, I'm going to be rich and famous. It's not about me. It's all about God. And for what I'm doing, I'm fulfilling a purpose that God has given me on this earth to get it done. But having received the prize, they didn't receive it here. And that's a key thing. As we get down through Hebrews chapter 11, the end of chapter 11 has always, for me, been the most powerful part of this. Because they don't just refer us back to these Old Testament characters. Because they're thousands of years old. And we can even take kids today and we can tell them the stories of Daniel's in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the fiery furnace. We can tell them of Gideon, we can tell them of Samson, we can tell them of David. And these people seem to some of these kids that have no understanding or have never heard these stories before, they're so remote. They're so far off. They're so far in the history. And there's so many other things that come from Greek mythology or Roman mythology, and they're all kind of lumped together, and I can't tell what's real from what's not. And the writer of Hebrews, probably through the inspiration of God, as he writes this, there's an understanding of this. And this is where I think it becomes really relevant to us. Relevant. You can edit that, right?
Yeah.
Relevant. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 36 through 40, and for me, when I was reading through this previously, this is the part that really started to hit me. Others had a trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. And we can start to think, okay, through the Bible, we can see some of these people, okay, through the prophets, that suffered, what Jeremiah suffered through, and what Ezekiel suffered through, and what some of the other ones suffered through. And then we start thinking, wait a minute, the New Testament church in the first century, what they suffered through. And we can start to see some of this starting to get closer and closer. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented. And our mind can right away go back to, okay, like John the Baptist, and like Elijah, and some of these other guys, and what the torture that they went through, and what they had to wear. But as we can think about this and it coming closer and closer, this isn't necessarily too far from where we could possibly be, and we'll talk about that. Verse 38 is the key point that really, for me, hits this home. Of whom the world was not worthy. Now, by the world standard, these people are the scum of the earth. They're the dregs of society. They're nobodies. And for me, this is God saying, from my perspective, the world is not worthy of these people. And to me, that's huge. That's a big thing that's put in there. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And these, having obtained a good report through the faith, received not the promise. God, having provided some better thing for us, that they, without us, should not be made perfect. They were forward-looking, waiting for us all to be rewarded together in the whole conglomerate of it. So here, we talk about these people, and we talk about this coming closer and closer. And we can see, we have the Old Testament characters in the Hall of Faith. We have minor prophets. We have the first century church. But then I start thinking about Christians in even more modern times and what they had to give up. When we come through the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and we have some of these people that are trying to live their faith out. They're being ostracized. They're not being given jobs. They're being pushed out of places. They have no food. They have no clothing. And they are actually fitting some of these characteristics. And when they are professing and confessing, they're being taken out and they're being slaughtered because of what they believe, and they're being tried to change in their thought process, and they're not doing it. And as I'm thinking about, one of the greatest examples I can think about of martyrdom is Polycarp, who was the bishop of Smyrna. And he was actually a disciple under the Apostle John. And they knew Smyrna, if you go through even Revelation, the word Smyrna comes from the word myrrh, and we know that myrrh is an embalming ointment that is used. And the word Smyrna basically tells you that this church is going to be the persecuted church. And Polycarp is the bishop there. He's the elder in the church. And they know they're coming for him. And Polycarp knows they're coming for him. And Polycarp has the opportunity to leave. But he doesn't. And he stays. And he's an old man. He's 86 years old. And he stays. And even when they come, he offers food and rest for the soldiers that are going to take him back. He allows them to come into his house, eat his food, and while they're eating, he prays. And when they go, he goes back. Now, how can this guy think he's receiving the prize by doing this? And they take him into the Roman Colosseum. I don't know if it's actually the Colosseum. They take him to Rome, and he's being tried. And they're trying to get him to recant his faith. And all he has to do is say, Caesar Christo. Caesar's Lord. Is all he has to do. In front of all these people that are watching. And they threaten him with everything. We're going to turn wild beasts on you. All you have to do is confess, and he won't do it. Well, we're going to burn you with fire. And his response is, what are you waiting for? The fire that you burn me with will only burn for an hour. But the fire that I could endure is eternal damnation. And with that, they let him on fire. But if you read the story behind Polycarp, these people that are all watching are seeing a testimony of someone. Why does someone die for that? How could someone that could have easily gotten away with just saying two words and gotten away with it? This faith has to be something. And that's why we find out that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the gospel. And that by witnessing these people dying for their faith, more people were convinced that something has to be going on in the faith. And more people were turned against Rome, and the early church grew because of these kind of things. So we can even look at ourselves. We can even look around this room, and what does our faith cost us? What does it cost us in terms of finances? What does it cost us in terms of friends? What does it cost us in terms of fame or anything that we could have gotten in the world? You know, it would be easy, and one of the things that's, I shouldn't say it's hard for me, but every year you got to do your taxes, and every year, you know, you figure out how much I gave to charity, and you look at that number, and I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's $10, I don't care if it's $100, I don't care if it's $1,000, I don't care if it's $10,000. You look at that, and right away, I don't know if you're like me, but right away your mind goes to, that's a gun. If I wouldn't have given that money to the church, I could have had a new gun. Oh, if I wouldn't have given that money to the church, that's a new car. Oh, if I didn't give that money to the church, that's... And you start this, and you have to reevaluate. What is the cost, and what's the prize? And is it worth it? Do I continue on because I know it's the right thing to do or what God wants me to do, or am I doing it for selfish reasons or not? And it's a chance to reevaluate and find out what these things are. And to me, this comes down to running the race. Running the race and knowing what the prize is ahead of us. And we're going to talk about what the prize is here in a little bit. This running the race, we're talking about something to try to make it relevant, something that requires endurance to get a prize in the future. That includes a cloud of witnesses. So if you just can think about that, think about something that costs a long period of time in order for you to see any reward from it. It's hard and you have to endure to get through it. And there is a cloud of witnesses in the sense of someone that has gone before me that has shown me that this is worthwhile and productive to do. I don't know if I'm saying that right about the cloud of witnesses. But think about examples, and I'll give you a couple, because for me, it's these things just start to pop up, and then when I look at this, I go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Let's talk about, I'm watching golf the other day on TV, right? And they're playing at Marion, they're playing the Open Championship. And golf is a long game, 18 holes, and you've got to play all the way through. And you've got to play each hole in order to win. You can't just, I'll play the first one as best I can and coast through the rest of them. You've got to play each individual hole as you go through. And as they're playing these holes in the Open Championship, they're talking about, here's the plaque, where Ben Hogan hit this, one iron from here and reached the green or something. I don't remember what the plaque is for. But as the people are standing there, they're all remembering this classic picture of Ben Hogan with his follow-through. And they're knowing that Ben Hogan persevered through this whole thing to win this championship. And he becomes one of their cloud of witnesses that shows them it's possible to win this if you endure to the end. And even in the end of the tournament, Justin Rose was ahead before everybody else finished. And he was in the trophy room walking around looking on the walls at all the other people that had won this championship. And it was kind of a classic thing of this is the cloud of witnesses that are surrounding him, showing him that patient endurance brought them to a place where they were able to win the prize. And now, because he patiently endured through all of the trials of the golf course, he also was able to obtain the prize and now becomes part of that cloud of witnesses. All right? Does that help with anybody formulate something? I know it's kind of hard because it's a picky little deal. I'll give you another one. Working in the garden. Working in the garden is tough because you can't get the ground ready, and then it rains and it snows and it gets cold, and then you plant stuff and it doesn't come up, and then when it does come up, the weeds come up, and you got to pull the weeds, and you got to throw the rocks, and you got to do all this stuff. And what are you doing with the garden? What is the purpose for raising the garden?
Harvest.
You want the harvest, and that's the prize at the end. But you know, there gets to be times when it's 90, 95 degrees out there, and it's 1,000% humidity, and you don't want to be out there anymore. And what keeps you going?
Harvest.
The prize is part of it, but what also helps keep you going? The cloud of witnesses that are around you that say, we've done this. You can do this. We've done it. And it's kind of funny because some of the stuff, when I do the garden, I don't even think about until after the fact. So I try to go up in the morning when it's not too hot yet, but I try to get up there for a half hour, and I thought, well, I better take some fertilizer up. So I took my bucket, 5-gallon bucket, I put a little fertilizer in it for the corn. I went up and I fertilized the corn. I thought, well, you know what, now I got a bucket. I might as well fill it with weeds. So I pulled a bucket of weeds, and I dumped it. And then I thought I can go back. Well, you know what, I might as well pick up a bucket of stones. Take a bucket of stones back. So I picked up a bucket of stones, I took them back to dump them in the driveway. And as I'm walking down the trail, I thought, you know what, when I was a kid, what did we have to do in the garden? Go down there and fill a box with weeds and dump it out. Or fill a box of stones and dump it out. And I thought I'm doing the same thing that as a kid was kind of a punishment or kind of a, but it was beneficial to the end of winning the prize. It was part of that endurance. It's something that has to get done. It's part of that trial that has to be done. And by doing it, if you persevere to the end and don't give up, you can obtain the prize at the end. So it comes down to this thing of, do we have to raise a garden? No. But I want to, because why? It helps me relate back to some of my heritage. I know it's something that can be done, and I know there's a prize at the end. And there's a cloud of witnesses around. And one of the things that I always remember about Nana and Papa, there was always certain questions that when you showed up, when you met them, they always asked. One was, are you still going to church? That was one of the first ones they always asked. And, I mean, there's times in my life that I'll not tell the truth. But I could never look at Papa and not tell the truth. And I never wanted to tell the man, I'm not going to church anymore. I never wanted to look in his eye, and not that he would say anything, not that, I don't know how he would have reacted. But I never wanted to disappoint him in the fact of, no, I'm not going to church anymore. Count that for whatever you want to count it for, I don't know. But it made an impression on me, that he was in this cloud of witnesses, still alive, but he was in this cloud of witnesses. That was, it's worthwhile, it's patiently enduring, and it's not always easy to go to church, but there's prize at the end. And then Nana always, are you growing a garden? And same thing. I didn't want to tell Nana I'm not growing a garden. Yeah, I'm growing a garden. You ain't doing very well. You know, are you picking peas yet? Oh, this is getting painful. But you know what? Then she would say, we're growing a garden. And the rabbits got in it, or whatever. You know, and it was the same deal. It's the cloud of witnesses that are around you telling you, yes, we know it's hard because we've done it. But yes, we know that there's a prize at the end if you patiently endure, and you need to keep on patiently enduring. And I kind of picture this cloud of witnesses as more of a cloud around us, guiding us, but also kind of hurting us and leading us on this thing. Not just standing in the stands cheering, I hope you finish, yeah. No, I think they're there saying, come on, we can do it. We've done it. We've already passed this part. Keep coming, keep coming. And for me, that's part of the important thing. Is that we don't only have the Old Testament way back, did they really exist? I don't even know. And what the stories about them that we heard in Sunday school that now we're finding out, they sugarcoat it. And then we have these people that were prophets and the New Testament church that was persecuted for what they did and to death, and even all the way up through to where we have family heritage that we can actually, I know Pop-Pop was a real person. I know Pop-Pop really lived. I know Pop-Pop really went to church and really believed in what he said. I knew Nana really had a garden. And there's no doubt about it. And you see how the cloud of witnesses is right around. So it got to be the same thing, even like doing maple syrup. You know, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know how the weather's going to work. And when you go on the forums, oh, you should be using a power drill, and you should be using a suction line, and you should be... But my thing is, I have Pop-Up Gross's auger. And I go out there with the brace and bit. And that's what I think about. I don't know what Pop-Up ever did with that. But he did something with it. And then I have Dad's spiles. Tap them in the thing. Now I got my buckets, or, well, my plastic buckets that I throw away. But anyway, but to me, it's something you can do, and it takes patience, and it takes endurance. Sometimes it's hard to carry those buckets through the snow and but there's a prize at the end. And you can do it. And you can do it well because we've done it. And to me, that's what the whole thing of this is. To finish this up, the author of Hebrews doesn't just leave us with hanging in the air with this. He sums the whole thing up in chapter 12. I shouldn't say he sums it up, but he brings this to a pretty big head right here in verse 2 and 3, saying, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. We can start, let's break it down as we go. Author, the starter, the beginner, the one who orchestrated all of this. The prince, the captain, the leader. That's actually what the word author means. The prince, the captain, the leader of it. The first one, the principal one. And the finisher of our faith. The perfecter, the completer. The one that completed the whole thing. If Jesus Christ was not who he said he was, did not live the life that he did not die on the cross, was not dead in the ground for 3 days, was not raised from the dead, our faith has not been completed or finished. Okay? There's no two ways about it. You cannot separate our faith from that person. Okay? The completer of our faith. Who for the joy that was set before him, the prize, for the prize that was there, endured the cross, patiently endured the cross, despising the shame, thinking nothing of it. Okay? All the things that I'm going to have to endure, thinking nothing of it. The fact that I'm going to be naked, hung up on a cross, everybody's going to come by and jeer me and throw stuff at me and spit at me and call me every name in the book. I think nothing of that. That means nothing. Going back to these people that were sawn asunder, of whom the world was not worthy. Here you go. Despising the shame is set down on the right hand of the throne of God. He received the reward. That's the reward for his suffering, is the authority that he's been given. Consider him that endured such a contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your own minds. Jesus becomes the greatest in the cloud of witnesses around us. He becomes the leader in the cloud. And everything else, as it follows the cloud, and if we want to go back to the Old Testament, and we want to start to look at, especially like through that book that you gave me from that, who was that guy that comes to your church, the Jewish guy?
Oh, yeah.
Metzger.
Metzger.
John Metzger. You start to look at this cloud, and the cloud was probably personification of the second person of God, who was Jesus Christ. He is the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Old Testament, how does it say? The Word came to. And when we see this and we start to think about the cloud leading them through, and if it's a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ coming through, and we can see he's leading the people through, and when the tough times come, he comes around and says, I'll be the rear guard. I'll stop them. They will not get you from being delivered. And then, when deliverance comes, right back again. And we'll lead you through. He becomes the greatest in the cloud of witnesses. Which now rolls into, what are we supposed to be as Christians? What does the word Christian mean? A follower of Christ, a little Christ, an example of Christ, a follower of Christ becoming more like Christ. So as we become part of somebody else's cloud of witnesses, as they're following Jesus, we should be in that cloud, moving closer and closer toward the one who's an example for us, whom we're being molded into the image of, and it's becoming kind of a funnel cloud. And it's a narrow path pointing toward the direct prize. Now, when we think about what the prize is, what's the prize that we're striving for? And here again, we're being sold a lie by a lot of people that are watering down the gospel because they're trying to make it about us. So they tell us, the prize for you is you can get to heaven. And for me, that's not the prize. that's an offshoot of the prize. The prize is, I get to glorify God the way I was created to be and what I was supposed to do. In Colossians, we're told that everything was made to glorify the Son. And we are being conformed into His image, that at a time when we're in heaven, we can fully worship God and fully glorify God in the manner that we're supposed to do. And heaven is just part of that. And why wouldn't it be? We get to live and dwell in the place where God lives. So our ultimate thing is to glorify Jesus Christ in the way He ought to be glorified. And by that, we get a return blessing from it. The same way as any crowns that we get, they're not for us to walk around with on a balancing act on our head. They're for us to cast back at His feet and giving honor and glory back to Him for Him empowering us to be able to do it. So the prize is us being conformed into the image of where this section ended up with Jesus Christ, the author and finisher of our faith. And that should be the ultimate goal for each one of us, knowing that as we're running the race and we're trying our best and we trip and stumble somewhere, that it's because that I take my eyes off of what the prize was. That I start looking at something else and that caused me to miss the mark. And then get my eyes back on, I'm trying to be who God needs me to be and wants me to be, so I can be conformed to the image of His Son and worship God the way He ought to be worshipped. And I think as a family we've been given quite an opportunity in the fact that we have a cloud of witnesses that's very close, that we can look to very clearly and say they weren't perfect people, but they knew where the prize was and they pressed toward the prize. And not only pressing toward the prize, but reaching back saying, come on, we can make it. And that's important. So. Sorry, John, I got a little emotional there. All right.
Love you, man.
Huh?
Love you.
So, let's close in prayer if I can get through it. Father, thank you for a time to look in your word. Thank you for the importance of what you put in here. Thank you for individuals that we can look at very clearly and we can see that this was important and this was true. Help us, Father, to channel that cloud of witnesses to know we need to press on toward the mark. Thank you for your time here. In your precious and holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Still want to oil that thing there? Just put a sweatshirt on. Pants that
Hey,
crush
Kevin,
your
that
knees.
Chris Roseborough, I listened to that Fighting for the Faith.
Yeah.
Said something interesting just about the deity of Christ, you know? Talks about how in the Old Testament when it says, thus saith the Lord, that's Yahweh.
Yep.
Like the main title for God.
Right,
something
right.
like that.
Mom, Mio's
And
calling.
then he went to Matthew 23.
Could you put this in?
Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Verse 34. Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes. And it's Jesus speaking.
Right.
And Jesus there is saying, therefore